In this video, we're going to break down one of the most basic and fundamental concepts in business, competitive advantage, and why companies want to create a competitive advantage. It's the why you choose a business over the other. So I'm going to break down some of the key concepts and give you concrete examples of what a competitive advantage is. In short, competitive advantage is the ability of a company to outcompete its rivals. For example, you have a singular market. Let's say, for example, something with a homogeneous product. Let's say you have an accountancy firm. Now, there are many different types of firms that specialize in accountancy services, bookkeeping, auditing, and they all provide a similar service. When you have a competitive advantage, you're able to get customers because you can attract more customers, you can become a bigger company, and you have the potential to make higher profits. So you look at the company and you kind of identify what makes them stand out over its competitors. For example, you might go to some accounting firms and they all provide a similar service, but one specializes in border tax, Canada and US tax. One specializes in bookkeeping. One does small businesses. One does corporations, but more specifically restaurants. So you can see how you have a similar product or service, but you have to identify what the company is good at, their core competencies and strengths, and then differentiate themselves from the competition. Now, it's important to note that competitive advantage only works within that specific market and it's always relative. So, for example, you can kind of look at the accountancy market and see where there are gaps in the market. For example, you might have one accountancy firm that stands out because none of their competitors are knowledgeable about the mining industry. So, within different markets, there's always going to be some gaps or some market opportunities. And that's where a company might have a competitive advantage, whether it's their knowledge, their staff, their resources, their experience. They tap into those internal resources and deliver a product or service that's really different and better than the competition. So the core question becomes, what allows this business to perform better than others selling similar products? It's the why. If the answer isn't clear, the advantage probably isn't sustainable. Competitive advantage is important, in my opinion, because it allows you to stand out from the competition and it allows you to really create branding in terms of this is the reason that your customers are going to choose you over the competition. What makes you stand out? In a cereal box aisle, there's many different cereal boxes. What makes you stand out? Is it the nutritional facts, the protein that you provide in your products? Is it the branding? Is it your targeting towards children or maybe seniors for health benefits? So you have to really identify your internal competencies and how you can deliver a product or service that your competition simply can't match. Now, one key point to understand is that competitiveness is going to vary, and there's a variety of different factors. One could be the number of rival businesses. For example, where I live, there's only one business that sells auto insurance. It's a Crown Corporation. So, because there's no competition, that means that they can charge whatever they want for auto insurance. Now, there's pros and cons to that approach, but many feel that separating it or creating competition could lead to better prices. So that's a common debate amongst people. You could think about the degree of product differentiation because businesses like to create differentiated products. So, for example, in the hamburger market, you have a product which is pretty standard meat, bread, some cheese, and vegetables, but every company tries to create their own spin on it. For example, McDonald's has always popularized a menu with classic products like their Big Mac, their cheeseburger, the iconic taste, simple ingredients, and fast service, while Burger King focuses on their charbroiled flavors, their grilled flavors, their Whoppers, A&W of their teen burgers. So notice how you have kind of a standard product to some extent, and then you put your own spin on it to differentiate amongst the competition. Depending on a number of competitors, markets can get very complicated and also very competitive. So it's important and imperative that you have a competitive advantage. What makes you stand out amongst the competition? Some companies like to focus on speed, a really good drive-through experience. Taco Bell is often seen as a growing company amidst all of the food inflation. They have a core menu of popular products that are easy to execute, and they're able to maintain a loyal fan base and a consistency in their products. Markets can also be complicated because buyers have many choices, and when there's competition, there tends to be lower price. If it's easy for competitors to switch between providers, let's say, for example, telephone or internet, that means that the market tends to be more competitive. Where I am, there only is really two or three kind of main options for internet, although that's expanding. In Canada, telecom companies tend to be very consolidated, so there's only like three to five big companies. So cell phone plans, historically relative to like the US, have been very expensive because there doesn't tend to be a lot of options. Same thing with home internet. We have TELUS, Shaw, and you kind of have Novus, but it's like a new company. So not really a lot of options, which means that the companies have a lot of pricing power to some extent. If you don't like TELUS, you go to Shaw. If you don't like Shaw, you're kind of out of options. So markets are kind of different depending on the competitiveness, the amount of sellers, the rivalry, differentiation. But all in all, if you're able to create a competitive advantage, it gives you the why and it gives you a reason for your customers to choose you over the competition. One of the key points I want to mention about competitive advantage is that the competitiveness of a market will determine the strategies that the businesses will use to try to gain a competitive advantage. Let's talk about airlines. In the airline industry, there are a few kind of dominant players, but in the US, there's a lot of different airlines. And with little differentiation, businesses are forced to focus on trying to maintain efficiency, cost control, and pricing. So some companies tend to focus in the airline industry on getting as much fees as you can for check-in baggages, extra fees, looking for extra revenue, because an airplane flight is an airplane flight. There's not much differentiation, although some airlines try to focus on other non-monetary things like customer service or experience. So, given a standard service or product, an airline must identify what is their main competitive advantage. Is it the number of flights, convenience, customer service, or even the food or beverage options? In markets where the products are more differentiated, the businesses can compete through quality, features, service branding, or customer experience. A common example is tutoring. In the tutoring business, the service tends to be very differentiated, and businesses can compete because you can offer different qualities of tutoring services, online options, virtual options, different resources, AP prep. So the idea here is that depending on your industry, the competitiveness is going to vary and it's going to require you to develop different types of strategies. In other words, strategy isn't chosen randomly. It's kind of shaped by the structure and the competitiveness of the market as well. One key competitive advantage is cost. If you are able to produce things at a lower cost, that gives you an advantage because customers are very price sensitive. If you are able to sell a product for as cheap as possible but similar quality to other competitors, you have an advantage. An example is the commodity market. In the commodity market, the products are pretty standard, like wheat, soybeans, grain, rice. So businesses compete on cost. How can I extract or how can I increase my output with the limited amount of inputs that I can? So how can I get the most value for the minimum amount of resources that I expend on my operations? So some focus entirely on cost. So if you're able to get automation, bulk purchasing, and logistics, you can really lower the cost of your product. And given a market where the prices are pretty fixed, that means that you can get more profits for your operations. So, for example, broccoli tends to be a pretty standard product. If you are farming and you're producing broccoli, the broccoli you make is pretty similar to your neighbor's broccoli. So, what you try to do is you try to create economies of scale. You try to make sure things are efficient, lean, you don't waste resources, and you try to find ways to save money. A similar company that operates under this kind of lean structure, economies of scale, is Walmart and their supply chain. So, Walmart is a huge company, and since they have a lot of buying power, this means that they are able to price their products at a low price relative to your neighbor store or bodega. So, similar to a commodity market, if they're able to lower their costs, that gives them a competitive advantage. So, Walmart has historically pushed out a lot of small businesses because these small businesses cannot compete with Walmart on cost. One industry that I've seen that is has really been taken over by large players is the TV industry. So if you buy a TV, chances are you buy from one of the big box stores like Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon. So you go to one of those stores. But back then, there actually used to be small businesses selling TVs. Only they didn't buy as many TVs as Best Buy because they don't have that pricing power. Best Buy has a competitive advantage, being one of the largest companies that sells TVs and electronics. They can buy a lot, lower their prices, and pass on those cost savings to customers, which is why you don't really see a small business selling TV or a neighborhood store selling TVs. So in that industry, competitive advantage really comes down to efficiency, scale, and how you manage your costs. Now, when your market is differentiated, now this is where things tend to vary. Now, customers aren't just looking for price, they're looking for, non-monetary factors like, for example, what they pay for and all of the benefits that they get from supporting your business. A common example of a popular company in the US is Chick-fil-A. Now, Chick-fil-A is one of the most profitable franchises because they don't have a lot of Chick-fil-A's, but they're able to sell so many sandwiches with a limited number of locations. Like they don't have the same number of locations as McDonald's, but they're able to be very profitable because they focus on things like customer service, brand loyalty, a good quality of product, branding, and also their marketing. When you go through a Chick-fil-A drive-through or restaurant experience, you know you're going to be treated with warmth, hospitality, and you know that you're going to get a good experience. So it's not just about the product, it's about how you're treated through as you walk straight in through those doors. So differentiation is not necessarily just about cost, it's also about how you're treated, the service. So as a business, depending on your market, you have to identify what's going to give you that competitive advantage. Maybe you have some knowledge of the restaurant industry, and then you can pass it down to make your products more efficiently or with lower cost. Or you're able to really connect with your customer base, and through marketing or social media, you have those competencies, and that's going to set you apart from the competition. In these types of markets where it's not just about cost, perception is everything. People are much more willing to pay for a Chick-fil-A sandwich, even if it costs more, because it's not just about being better. Chick-fil-A has managed to communicate through their value proposition why you should support Chick-fil-A. It's not just about the high quality of product, it's about their service and customer experience. So, to wrap up this podcast episode, a few things that I want to mention. So, competitive advantage is what sets you apart from the competition. How you create your competitive advantage is going to depend on your industry, the number of sellers, and how fierce the competition is. Highly competitive markets means that you try to increase efficiency, lower costs, especially if the service and products tends to be pretty standard. But if you have a market with a differentiated product where people are trying to focus on non-monetary benefits, then you can think about other things like quality, customer service, even knowledge, or how you treat your customers. So, depending on what you sell or the product or service, your competitive advantage is going to vary. Once you understand how to create competitive advantage, you can see where there are market opportunities and think about pricing strategies, marketing, or branding, and how to really tap into those competencies to dominate the competition. Think about what it is that you can provide and what sets you apart from the competition. Once you're able to do that, you have a recipe for success and you have the potential to make a lot of profits. Thanks for watching this episode of Andrew Talks Business. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.